Hi, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec Podcast, where I'll help you create teams worth leading, because life's too short to lead mediocre teams. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, advisor and consultant to tech execs worldwide. And today, our subject is too cozy. I hope you're not too cozy over there. This idea for the episode came to me after I just happened to talk to a few people recently who were managing employees who were within the company for years, not 3, 4, sometimes even more. And they were seeing real issues with those people's ability to take themselves into the next stage. And I don't blame them. I see that all the time. There's an issue with how cozy, comfortable, used to things we get with time. You see that with, people in politics, you see that maybe with your kids, you see that with ourselves, and of course, you see that in careers. When someone's in the team for too long, especially if we're in an industry where things keep changing, sometimes the changes that are needed because external factors change, because the company needs to get to the next level, are changes that seem almost incomprehensible for people who have been within it for too long. You're the fish in the water. You just assume that the water is always going to be the same around you and needs to stay like that. However, when things are hectic out there, you might not be in a position to help it improve. So, for example, I recently talked to someone whose director of engineering, one of the directors, was so long within the company that he has learned to operate at optimal comfort with everyone around. What does that mean? He knew how to spot when colleagues from product or in the CEO, etc., started getting angry or started really demanding something. And he, after all of these years, especially as an IC and then moving up the chain, has sort of learned this set of tactics that allowed him to always de-escalate and get to things being settled real quick. However, that was almost always at the cost of him letting go of long-term potential, of not voicing his real concerns. He'd just try for a second, see that there's some pushback, and he'd immediately start stepping back. And again, this might make sense in specific scenarios where you see that this is not a fight worth fighting, etc. Okay, if this is your modus operandi, if this is how you approach most things, you cannot be a viable leader. So even if you've been in the company for so long, because you're now over-indexing on comfort, on coziness, you find it hard to break things when needed in order to change them up. You find it hard to all of a sudden not be liked by others or sense like people aren't liking you. You're not making them feel happy just because you have a different professional opinion. You and the people in your organization cannot get to a point where just to make people feel better, we're avoiding doing the things we ought to do. Just because the comfort zone is so comfortable by now, you cannot just stay there. And I want you to, as a takeaway from this episode, start thinking, how can you spot this happening for yourself and for your people? So, for example, I talked to someone who had this leader in the organization that's been like so for so long. And for the CTO who had this person reporting to him, this was just natural. I mean, he just got used to that. He already knew how to overcompensate for that person's issues. Overcompensation is, by the way, the previous episode. And he already knew how to tackle things. He already knew in advance where this person might be having issues. So he already knew the whole set of dance moves to operate with this person in a way that didn't cause a lot of issues. However, while the CTO thought that this made things stable, he didn't recognize the fact that all of this coziness that he was creating for the person reporting to him was coming at the cost of none of them, both of them, not having the real capacity to do what they ought to do, because the CTO had to do all of this weird dance moves to protect the director, and the director was not aware of how he had to improve and was just doing things in his own comfort zone, just producing work that sometimes no one even needed, and the CTO kept replacing without no one being aware, because that was, again, the easiest thing to do. The comfort zone, if you're thinking about how you can tackle it, is about finding opportunities to help people do things they're not used to. So if you, for example, when you think about your people, when you're giving them feedback, I bet that you have this image in your mind of like the default stance a bunch of them would have when a typical sort of situation happens. And just because it's their default, it doesn't mean that necessarily it is bad. However, I want you to consider sometimes these defaults can, when you think about them, they can be associated in your mind with something almost comical. You're like you're kidding a bit, because whenever we get that sort of issue, I can trust that John will try to de-escalate real quick by saying we'll cut on that, or we'll have the team work a bit harder just to make everyone feel better, as opposed to saying, okay, what do we do? How do we prioritize? What do we need to cut? Why are we here again? When you have this coupling of someone's automatic moves that you can anticipate, and you see them and they're associated with something that's a bit not serious, not ideal in your mind, this coupling is a great point for coaching, for giving them feedback. Don't allow them to continue on this path, but instead find a way for them to step outside of their comfort zone, even if for a short while, even if it's some sort of an exercise. Give them a feedback that tells them when you get pushback from people about a deadline, rather than immediately saying, okay, we'll work harder, okay, I'll stay late, the team will work the weekend. Rather than do that, wait a second and try to think, okay, what can we do? We need to prioritize things. We need to decide what we're going to do, because we cannot do it all. Having a person even state this by itself, even if they end up caving the first couple of times, that's already moving outside of their comfort zone. That's already making positive progress. And that's what we want, okay? Stop creating an organization that's just so cozy, because eventually you'll have all of these chicks who never want to leave the nest. It's just so cozy, they never learn how to take flight. And, while they might seem cute right now, when they grow too big and the nest is going to get way too crowded and you cannot bear the weight of giving them all the food they're going to require as they grow, your comfort zone is not going to stay comfortable much more, at least for yourself. And then you're just going to start overcompensating. Again, see the previous episode. That's it for this week. I hope you have a good takeaway. I hope you are able to think about at least one person in your organization that needs this sort of feedback and coaching that you can help them with. And if you have similar cases, I'd love to hear. My email's in the show notes. Do check out my newsletter. The link is in the show notes. And it's just, I believe, even though I'm not objective, it's the best newsletter for tech execs online. And that's it. I'll be here next week.